What is up, Watch fam? Happy Wednesday, and welcome to this week's collection review. I am Christian from Theo and Harris, and today we're going to be diving into one killer 10-piece watch collection from Rolex, Patek, JLC, and much more. Let's do it. Okay, quick wristwatch check. I am wearing a killer yellow gold Datejust with a gilt dial. The Jubilee bracelet is a little bit big on me, but I'm also a little bit cold right now, so doesn't that kind of affect how the bracelet wears? And beside this awesome vintage Rolex, I am wearing our brand new addition to the Teenage Gear Shop. The spring bar is an irrefutably foundational part of the watch community, just like rowers have oars and lacrosse players have lacrosse sticks, like in this way, we have the spring bar. So go pick yours up in the Theo and Harris Gear Shop. The link is in the description. Now, let's get into this killer collection. All right, the first watch is a modern Rolex Thunderbird, a watch that I'm a little bit conflicted about. The watch itself, aside from my historical thoughts, is really beautiful. I love the fluted bezel, classic Datejust, and the classic Jubilee. It has all of the elements of a classic, Rolex, but that blue dial and the red second hand, I think it's a great looking Rolex with quite a bit of flair. As far as a Thunderbird is concerned, it's borderline for me. It's a little bit too fancy, I think, to be totally true to the Thunderbird, utilitarian tool kind of pilot's watch. But still, I don't have too big of a problem. Bezel, although fancy and fluted, still does have instrumentation. So it's kind of a toss-up for me as far as, how true it is to the Thunderbird legacy. But does it really matter? I just think it's a cool piece that most people have never even heard of. So score. The next watch is a Rolex Oyster Perpetual reference 114200. This is a terrific little sports watch. Most people think that 34 millimeters is too small, but I love to see it in your collection, particularly next to some of the watches that are to come, which are so polar to this. I also happen to think that the dial configuration on this is quite nice, but ultimately the point that this watch drives home is that no frills 34 millimeter Rolex Oysters are phenomenal, and when you see what's to come in just a second, you're gonna kind of laugh, and say, how odd that this simple little Oyster Perpetual could hold a place in the same watch box as what we're talking about in a second. So the next watch is this, a Royal Oak by Audemars Piguet with a day-date function. It's a weird watch. I happen to think that it's quite nice looking. I think the dial is, in its definition, very balanced. I happen to like the white dial. It's a fairly daring and very interesting execution of the classic Royal Oak. And I think it's very important to note, especially in a world in which the Royal Oak has been so distorted, that this model, although complicated, it really does respect Genta's original design pretty damn well. So props on this watch for sure. The next watch here packs some serious hot horology heat. It's a Patek Philippe, a reference 5980, which is the Nautilus chronograph. I actually don't like this watch as a Nautilus at all. I think, unlike the Royal Oak that we just talked about, this is kind of a bastardization of the Genta design. The diameter is much larger. It is much thicker. There are obviously chronograph pushers now. I think that for a Nautilus, this is not that great. I think that for a Nautilus, this watch sucks. But I think that for a Nautilus, this watch is antithetical and it sucks. But just as a watch, taking away all that historical baggage, I think it is pretty badass. I think it's pretty impressive how Patek even managed to make the pushers of the chronograph function really, really fit into the design super sleekly. Again, not supposed to be there on a Nautilus, but if you're going to, they did it pretty much so right. And if Patek with this watch was aiming for a mass market appeal, or even more specifically, an appeal to younger, sportier people, this watch is a home run. It's a great bridge to get people who are otherwise going to wear Hublots or Royal Oak Offshores. It gets them into Patek. which will ultimately get them into more refined, pieces. So I don't like it, but I also really do. Does that make any sense? His next watch is also a Patek Philippe. This one is actually my favorite Patek Philippe probably ever. The reference 3940, his in yellow gold. We just made an entire video on this, so I won't go into it. For me, this is a $40,000 watch, which is a ton of money. That is worth every single penny. So as soon as this video is done, click on the link in our description and watch the full video on this watch. It's probably one of the best T&H in-depth dives we've done. I'm massively in love with this watch, so go and check it out. For his next watch, John stayed complicated, but went with JLC instead of Patek with this, the ever cool and complicated Duomet. This watch is out of control. Not only is its manually wound German silver movement gorgeous, but the movement architecture is just phenomenal. It actually utilizes a second mainspring barrel to power the complications, including the chronograph. To power the complications, specifically the chronograph, which measures up to 1/6 of a second accuracy. This is a remarkable watch by one of kind of everyone's favorite companies. The retail, I believe, is $35,000. And while that's a ton of money, it's also a lot of value. So big props. Your next JLC, I'm not crazy about. It's the Master 8-Day Perpetual. I don't think they executed this complication in a simple way, which to me is kind of the trick of a perpetual calendar, making the most difficult of achievements seem like they were done with ease. Just off of the bat, I think I would have omitted the year. It adds a little extra level of clutter. And frankly, no one forgets the year. In a perpetual calendar, it's very important that the watch remember the year, but the watch doesn't need to tell it to me. I think it hinders the overall design. Great watch, I'm sure wonderful value, but for me, the clutter just, puts it over. Next, John definitely shifted gears again into the world of Panerai with this, the PAM 366. I've actually never seen this before, and you bought two and gave one to your brother. That's mainly why I included this Panerai in this collection review, not because it's the most complicated or interesting or well finished or so many things. It's not, but it's so wonderful that you went out of your way to give your brother not only a watch that you two could share, but a watch that realistically you're not going to see very often at all. So that's kind of your thing, So super well done. That's just very, very generous. Closing out your collection, you have a Casio, an OGW G2000H. Ridiculous reference number. I don't like those at all. I find them very confusing, and I don't really love this watch. I would love to hear more about it and why you own it. Maybe as a beater, maybe it's nostalgic. I would like to know. I would just prefer one of those rubber, like $6 Casios. Or what are they? $10? I think Anna has one, and those are just like terrific. That would have been more my speed. So now the big question, what do I recommend for your collection? Precious metal cases are obviously important to you, and beautiful movements aren't enough if they aren't brilliantly constructed, like your Duomet and like your 3940. So for me, the choice is obvious. The 1815 chronograph in white by A. Lange & Söhne. This is no secret. I'm a huge A. Lange & Söhne fan, and this is probably my favorite model of theirs. It's basically the baby datograph. It doesn't have the date and a much slimmer profile. It is the in-house chronograph movement that was released in 1999. That was basically an enormous fuck you to the entire watch industry. Patek at that point hadn't released their own chronograph in like 40 years, and even when they did in 95, which was the 5070, it was based on an old Lemania movement. So Lange & Söhne, a brand that was introduced just 4 years before this release, so A. Lange & Söhne, a brand that was introduced just 4 years before introducing this, that's massive. I can't imagine what it would have been like to be a fly on the wall to the 4 years leading up to that release, or what it would have been like to be at SIHH, I believe, when that was released, and just see everyone's reactions. Like who? Those guys that we just heard about a couple of years ago at this, the same event, those guys with like no global market share just released their own serially produced in-house manually wound chronograph? What? So to me, that underdog story, almost on its own, sells the 1815 chronograph. Throw in the fact that it's just one of the best chronograph movements in the world, and that's not from me, that's from Philippe Dufour himself. I don't know how you could pass it up. Especially you can get them like below 40 grand in so many cases. So go and buy it. What are you waiting for? And for the rest of you, if you love watches and enjoyed this video, go ahead and subscribe to our channel at Theo and Harris and join the TNH Watch Fam. I will see you all tomorrow.